Well, again, so this is part two of the chat that Dina just had. So, anyway, while Dina was chatting to Matthew from Dumfries, I was in a place called Portpatrick. Have you ever been there, Dina? Portpatrick?
I haven't actually, no. It's a place I'd like to go, actually. Not that far
Yeah.
away, isn't it? Down there
No,
near
it's not.
about the
Yeah.
A77.
Yeah. It's not far from Stranraer, from where you live, it's not that far. But anyway, the reason why I know about Portpatrick is going back to something that happened in 1990. That was the time that Timmy Mallet had the hit Itsy Bitsy Teeny Weeny, and as Dave McCune said, polka dot for Keeny. He was very funny, wasn't he? So anyway, he said it relentlessly. Anyway, so back then, both you and me are in Rutherglen, and we are living up closes or flats or wherever it is. And I'm doing the magazines. We're both servants, and my assistant to the magazines is a guy called Scott Cameron. Do you remember him?
Yes, yes. Nice chap.
Yeah, nice chap. So anyway,
Nice
um,
family.
yeah. So Scott's mum, I can't remember her name. It's gone from me. Oh, I forgot the mum's name.
Yeah, I'm terrible with names as well.
Anyway, let's just call it Scott's mum. So Scott's mum goes down to Portpatrick for a holiday, and she goes to the Stranraer congregation. While she's sitting there, somebody goes up and says, "Oh, where are you from?" And I'm Scott's mum, and they talk about where they come from with that lassie called Liz McCubbin, and she says, "Oh, we used to live in Glasgow." And when they got chatting, they found out that bizarrely they used to live quite close to each other, and both of their children would be the same age, and they both went to the same school at the same time. And when Liz McCubbin, I believe it said, pulled that school photograph, says, "Oh, you need to come back to our house." Lo and behold, Liz's eldest daughter, Miriam, was on it, and Scott Cameron was in the same school photograph. So that started off the connection between, there hasn't one before, between Rutherglen and the Stranraer congregation. So before you know it, as fate would have it, Scott would then start going out with Miriam, and Miriam was the oldest daughter. Underneath there was Ruth and a wee guy called Gordon. Um, then Miriam and Ruth came up to our flat in Queen Street Station, Jesus, Queen Street, and we had a wee party there, which I videoed and really dodgy video camera, which is actually on YouTube. And
Mhm.
eventually we got invited to go down to Portpatrick. Well, it was a place called Sandhead where they lived. And Miriam, a sister, and Gordon, and the mum and dad, Big Bill McCubbin, and Liz lived in a sort of separate house, with like no immediate neighbours. And to us coming down from Glasgow, it was like, oh my God, because of course, us living in closes, there were people above us and below us, and all of a
Mhm.
sudden there was
Yeah.
like no one around. To us, it was like a completely different life than I'd seen before than anyone. And Liz and Bill were so accommodating because like two car groups used to go down and stay, and they literally
Yeah.
opened up the
Mhm.
house. You know,
Yeah.
and me and Callan we're the only ones married at this time, so we're in the bedroom. Liz used to cook food all the time, and Bill used to just put up with us, and we did that to put up with us. We used to do like guns that fired water and spraying each other, and just it was utter chaos. They had an outdoor
Mhm.
caravan. The boys slept in there, and it was some of the best times I've ever had in this part of my life in the 1990s. It was just fantastic when everything was, we believe that paradise was imminent. And we went down there several times. Other people went with Simon and Vivian Pauly, Vivian Downey, and a guy who was in Rutherglen called Alistair. I can't even mind his surname. Do you mind his name? It was Alistair Mix something or other, and he was related to the Sharps or one. It was somebody from that lot, or the Greenleys, or somebody like that. I can't even. But
Right.
he was in our hall for a wee while. But he went
Right.
down as well, and we had a really good time, and we also started going to play to Portpatrick. It was the first time I've ever been to it. And in Portpatrick, a few pubs, but none of us were drinkers then, so we never really had a drink. But all the boys went playing on the little putting course. The girls did some walking. We went to Dunsky Castle. We had a great time. We did this many, many times, traveling between Rutherglen and Portpatrick and vice versa. And their family were fantastic to us. I absolutely loved Liz and Bill. And then eventually, of course, they would get married, Scott and Miriam got married, and we
Yeah.
played at their wedding.
We played two with the band, yeah. Mhm.
Yes. So we played at the wedding, but that was the wedding that was ruined by Brian Lowe because previously we played at Jim and Sharon's wedding, and Brian Lowe had ruined that by standing at the back, looking at everybody dancing to our, music of the devil. So when it came up to playing at Scott and Miriam's wedding, nobody would come up and dance to our, rock and roll music, and it was awful. It was really, really bad. He completely ruined that wedding. It's horrible. And then lots of people from Portpatrick had to leave early. So basically by the end we were playing to like a sheep.
Because nobody would get up and dance because Brian had made such a fuss in the
Yeah,
body of elders about
yeah,
people dancing. Because the video from Jim and Sharon's wedding,
yeah,
everybody was up dancing and they're
yeah,
having, you've got
yeah,
it on YouTube, everybody's having a
yeah,
whale of a time
yeah.
dancing away. Great fun. But
Right.
there was such a fuss made about it.
That's right.
Come their wedding, nobody would get on the dance floor.
Nearly got. No, sorry. It was awful. They ruined the wedding. They absolutely ruined the wedding. And then Miriam Scott, then Miriam became pregnant very early. And so they very, very early. Let me do the calculations. And the next thing is that they gave had a girl called Bethany, and Scott and Miriam went and lived in a wee satellite little house belonging to a big estate. And then we never went round to down and stay because they were married now. And Ruth they've seen somebody else. I don't know. I think Gordon maybe. I don't know if he was still in the truth at this point. And me and my wife went down to stay with Scott and Miriam quite a few times when what Rena was younger. But as she got older, she needed her own bed, so we never bothered. And then we had our own son, and eventually we left. And we never really saw Scott and Miriam ever again until that was 16 years ago. When 16 years ago, my nephew managed to put the bun in the oven of somebody from also the Mull of Galloway. And that really was a shotgun wedding. So they're not together anymore. So anyway, although I did see his ex-wife just over the weekend, funny enough, because she works in Portpatrick, so we did went and say hello to her. And we went down to the wedding in Stranraer, and while we were staying Stranraer, we were staying a couple of nights in the hotel, and we thought we'd go to Portpatrick and take our son, who at the time I think he might have been, oh Jesus, um, I don't know, maybe 12, something like he was a young guy, maybe 13, I don't know. And we were down in Portpatrick, and I just thought, and we both said, "Oh, remember the times that we had down here when all Rutherglen used to come down? The times we had with Bill and Liz and Scott and Miriam and Gordon and Ruth." And we said, "Oh, I wonder if Scott still lives in the satellite house up the way." And I knew where it was, and I thought, "Well, we don't want to just turn up." And I looked like, back mobile phones are now in power. And I knew Scott had his own alarm company. So I Googled him and I says, "Oh, there it is, and I rung it." And then Scott answered the phone and says, "Hi, Scott." I says, "It's Terry here." I says, "I'm here with my wife and my son who would love to see you and Miriam and your daughter. We're in Portpatrick." And I was just saying, "Is it all right we come up and see you?" And then Scott went, "Where are you?" I says, "Well, we're down in the outside in the pub." He says, "I'll come and see you." And I thought that was really odd. So he drives down to us. It takes him like 15 minutes, whatever it is, 10 minutes to drive down to us. And he comes in and, "Oh, hi, Scott, how's it going?" He's an elder now. And he was having to vet us to see if it was appropriate for us to go back to meet, Miriam, who we knew very well, and their daughter, who hadn't seen as a baby. It was easier for a Mexican to get into America. We had to go through all these questions, right? Why did you leave the witnesses? Blah, 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 blah. Right. And I didn't want to talk about witnesses. It's like trying to convince a Celtic fan to go to Ibrox and put on a blue shirt. Once you leave the witnesses, you're poles apart and you're not really going to swap over. So if we didn't talk about the witnesses, it's fine. But I just wanted to talk about his family, Bill and Liz, the times we had. And so eventually, after the extreme vetting process, we invited up to the place he used to live in. And Miriam was there, and she'd made an extra large amount of bizarrely chili. And she says, "This is Jehovah. This is a sign from Jehovah. I want to." Obviously, he knew you were coming today, and that's why he made the extra chili. Okay. And that's how Miriam was, because she was so kind-hearted in that way. She was always trying to see the positives in everything. So bless her heart. And we had a nice time with them, and we reminisced and blah 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 blah. But we left, and I think the last thing Scott said to me was, he says, "I just let you know, you two broke my heart when you left the witnesses, you know." And I felt terrible. How are you supposed to respond to that, you know? But I didn't sit there trying to convince him why I knew the decision I made was right, and while he was still wrong, I didn't want to change him, and he wasn't going to change me. And that would be it. That would be the last time I'd ever see these people for years. And until recently, should I say about 4 years, 5 years ago, when I was doing the driving, I had to drive down the Moor Galloway. I'd always wondered, I wonder if I'll ever get a delivery for either McCubbin or Scott Cameron or Miriam Cameron or Ruth. And I knew Ruth was married, but I didn't know her new surname. I never did. But while I was following the sat nav in my van, lo and behold, I drove past this place going, "I'm sure that's Bill and Liz's place," and had a wee boat outside of it. But I didn't have time to have a look. Does it have the name of the family on the outside? Can I drive up? You're doing driving literally. You don't have any time to socialize. So I just thought, and that was it. And that was 5 years ago. So this weekend we were back in Portpatrick. Me and my wife went and we stayed in a hotel. And we were reminiscing. Oh, remember when we came here? Oh, the putting green's still there. Oh, that terrible hole number 3. Oh, remember when we had a drink here? We're doing all the holidays and we walked to Dunsky Castle. Dunsky Castle, you can walk from Portpatrick to there. And the only time we went there was when Scott took us there. He also took us to a place called Kirkmadreen Stones. Never been since. And that was in 1990. So going back 36 years. Right. I think that's right. 36 years. 1990. So it's been a long time since I've been to Dunsky Castle and the Kirkmadreen Stones. So we leave on the Saturday after spending the night there, and we go into a little shop called the Smuggler's Cove. And the Smuggler's Cove reminded me of a little house I used to see when I was living near a little village called Ardwell, which looks like all this sort of antique stuff. It used to be in this little cottage, but it didn't say antique shop. It used to amuse me every time I go to Ardwell. Oh, there's that funny cottage with all these strange collectible things all piling up outside, which looks like a gypsy's house. And it was like this called the Smuggler's Cove. And we went in, and it's like when you go shopping with your wife. I walked out because there was nothing I wanted, and my wife stayed in. Till eventually she's taken a hell of a long time here, and I want to go to Kirkmadreen Stones. So I walk back in to find out she's chatting to the couple there. And I hear the back end of the conversation to realize they were the same people who ran it 36 years ago, who Miriam and Scott knew, and Miriam used to work in their shop they had in Stranraer. What are the chances they're still there? So, of course, we said, "Oh, we used to come down here with Miriam Scott." And then they went, "Oh, did you hear that Liz had died?" And we were like, "Oh, no, we didn't know," because Liz, Bill McCubbin's wife, Miriam's and Ruth and Gordon's mother had died. Says, "Oh, why? She'd got a bit of dementia. She went to a nursing home." Going, "Oh, my God." Because she wasn't that old.
Mm-hmm.
And says, "Oh, Bill's not very well either." And I was going, "Oh, dear." So, all of a sudden you give. And I said to him, I said, "Look," I don't even know where Scott is. I says, "Last time we met, it was a bit difficult." I says, "I don't think he'd even want to speak to us now." I said, "Funny if he'd speak to you." He says, "He still does my alarms." I says, "How alarming?" So he says, "Yeah, he still would speak to you." I says, "But he won't come and talk to me because I've left and I'm like worse than you." I says, "That's the way it is if you're an ex-Jehovah's Witness." So we leave Portpatrick, and I put into Google Maps Kirkmadreen Stones, going all these roads, which I'm trying to remember 5 years ago. But when you follow sat nav, usually you're just watching the thing on you. You know what I mean? You're not like looking at. You know what I mean? You're not looking at. Oh, there's that hill. Oh, there's that sheep. So you're just going on your way. And we're going down, and the next thing is I just said, "There's that boat in the middle of nowhere in this house." It says, that's the McCubbin house. That's where Liz and Bill lived, you
Mhm.
know? And obviously the wife says, do you think they're still there? Says, I don't know. And I didn't really want to go. I didn't after what happened last time, because what happened last time is last time we were there when I spoke to Scott, I think Scott or Miriam phoned the wife and said, "Oh, we mentioned to my mum and dad, Bill and Liz, that you'd come down here, and they were said it was all so sad that we no longer went. They felt very sad.
Mm.
It was all so sad that we never went. So I just thought, what you're pitching me because of not going, and it makes you feel crap because you feel as though they look down on you and feel sorry for
Yeah,
you because you no longer
yeah.
go. So we drove in and we see big long drive, and there's as usual for the McCubbins, cars everywhere. And I see at the front of the drive, it says McCubbin. I think they must still live here. So we just thought, what are we going to see here? Who's going to be here? And we see a bloke at the end, and I thought, right, that's not Scott. I don't know who that is. So he comes straight up to the car and says, can I help you? As you do. And I said, well, yeah, we used to know Bill and Liz. We just found out Liz has died, and we just wanted to, just come in and say hello to Bill. And the wife goes, "Oh, we used to be JWs," and he just never went. Oh, oh, he never gave us the grueling. So I thought, oh, he says, "Yeah, come in. I'd love to see you." I thought, well, this is good. So positive. So we go in. And I go into the bit I don't remember. It's an add-on because that confused me with my bearings. I went, hold on a second, this part of the house wasn't here. And we go in, and Big Bill McCubbin, who was a chimney sweep, he did roof and repairs, window cleans. He could put ladders on both shoulders. He was that, strong. You want to mess with him. He's in a chair, and around there's like two wheelchairs. He's got Parkinson's, and he's buggered, and he's diminished. And I just thought how much of it was like looking at my dad, before he went. I'm thinking how much of Bill lying there will remember me. So
Yeah.
I go in and go, hiya Bill, do you remember me? And of course, probably not. I'm bald. I'm 3 stone heavy, or is that 4 stone heavy? And I've got a beard. And I says, do you remember us? And I says, it's Terry. I says, remember we used to come down here. And then just coming out this room, out the extended lounge, was a woman I not recognise. I thought, is she the carer? And then I looked at her, and it was Ruth, who I haven't seen since Scott and Miriam's wedding. I've not seen them since. And I was like, and she's totally great. And she didn't know who we were because she looked at me and thinking, who's the fat bald bloke with the beard who just sits in to my dad, you remember me? And she comes up and gives us cuddles. And then she steps back, and she remembers who we are. And she brought us in for more cuddles.
That's
Oh,
good.
yeah. And then we just sat down and started reminiscing. And I was going to Bill. Remember Bill used to come down here, and I was reminiscing. Says, remember at the wedding, you were drinking out the whiskey thing, and you put it down to the next speaker, and I was doing all the DJing. I says, yeah, and the woman had to go with me. She was very angry. That was the woman doing the bar. She says, yeah. I says, I remember you picked it up, drunk it, and you looked down at me. Well, he did look down at me and says, tell, I'm pissed. I said, do you remember that? He says, yeah. He says, because the woman spotted the whiskey thing and she was doing the alcohol thing. Who brought that in there? I'm thinking, the guy is paying for you to be here. And so clearly he remembered a lot. He wasn't like, he was physically awful, but mentally he was still there. And then Ruth started telling that the mum had got dementia. She had to go into nursing home. And she said, see that photo up there? That was when she was losing it. And she still looked, to my mind, fine, but up here, gone. And then I think Ruth said she had a fall. And after that, it was downhill. And then she died after going to nursing home. And I was like, unbelievable. Because, of course, in your mind, when you don't see these people for years and years and years, you still think they're still middle age in their prime,
Yeah.
you know? So the next thing is he's all of a sudden appearing in Callan's and it's a convention invitation.
Yeah.
So Ruth's already snuck that one in. And I just thought, I'm not here to talk about the witnesses. I'm here to reminisce, to ask how after Bill is, to ask how Miriam is, Scott, Ruth's 2 kids. She's had 2 twins and they married 2 guys. They live in Rutherglen.
Good size.
Yeah, Ruth's 2 kids married
Okay.
2 people from up in Glasgow, and they're in the Rutherglen congregation
Rutherglen.
and live in flats near the big flats or whatever they are. Some flats up there. They live there. They live in Rutherglen. They've gone from living in the Muller Galloway to living where we used to live. Oh
Right.
dear. I couldn't believe it. I went, guess what the old Rutherglen? I think you're joking. Unbelievable. And I says, wait, well, what's happened to Wee Golden? Wee Golden fell away and he got really involved with this and that and the other, and he's got piercings everywhere. And he says, oh, he's doing better now. He's off the drink. He's off the fight. He says, do you know where he lives? I said, don't know. He says, if you ever go to Ardwell, there's this little cottage on the side. It looked like an antique. I went, oh my God. I says, I used to pass there every single time I used to drive in Ardwell. What are the chances? So anyway, he did mention conventions next week. He says we don't do the dramas anymore. There's no fake beards. It's all a lovely, 20th century Fox Hollywood prediction. Yeah, it's CGI. Of course, it's real beards or CGI beards now. Although none of them are beards. I was the only one who had a beard. As I was booking the trend, and they said, we says, how's Miriam? Says, oh, she's not very well. Says, why? Says, she's got Parkinson's. And she has a stick. And she should have 2 sticks. She's 10 years younger than us.
Goodness.
10 years younger than us. And I was going, oh my goodness. And then she told, and Ruth said, obviously Ruth still, on Facebook, she was contacting people who she used to know, the witnesses. She says, oh, get in contact with Vivian Downey. Because her and Simon Paulie split up. I says, oh, and she was telling Vivian, Ruth was telling the wife about Vivian, that Vivian's mum and dad, I don't know if you remember that, Ronnie and Margaret, that they both were ill. Vivian had to move in with them. She had Margaret on one sick bed, Ronnie on the other sick bed with Parkinson's, had to nurse both of them, and Margaret's died now. And now she's nursing her dad, right? And of course, when you're hearing this, and apparently Marilyn Wood's got dementia, early dementia as well, right? And it's just like Jesus Christ. So we sort of left. It looks shut the hands. Exactly the thing that I was fearing would not happen happened. That it wasn't. Oh, why not up and all this work and. It was, and Ruth got a selfie with us, and I said to him, I says, tell you what, put that on your Facebook and tag in Miriam and Scott if they're on Facebook, and says, guess who the short bald guy is with the beard? See if you know who that is. What is it? Yeah. Tell me. And so we left. So we're leaving back, and we came out quite uplifted in a sense, because it went not bad, because you always fear. Yeah. And I'm back driving down these roads. I put in Kirkmadreen Stones, so we're going Kirkmadreen Stones, and we're going round. And next thing is, we're about maybe 10 minutes out the house, and the road's quite narrow. I'm going maybe about 40, and all of a sudden a car comes in front. Both put on the brakes, and I looked at the driver, and he's not driving back. I thought, right, I'll drive back. I reversed back just to let enough space for him to get past. And of course, the car comes slowly past, and my window's down. I look in the window. It's Scott Cameron.
Unbelievable.
What are the chances? What are the chances that it's Scott Cameron after talking about him? And he then went and says, hiya, Scott. I haven't seen this guy in, don't know.
Yeah.
13, 14 years, whatever it's been. Longer.
You recognise you then?
Hey?
Did he recognise you straight off?
Well, no, he didn't recognise me. He said, I just saw the person, the woman in the car for us. I recognise her. So he recognised the wife, didn't recognise me. They look so facially different.
Carol's not really changed.
Yes. So, we said, oh, we've just been up to see Bill. We heard the sad news about Liz. We were just reminiscing. We were up speaking to Ruth, and Ruth, the husband, we had a nice time. And we heard the sad news about your wife, and and he says, yeah, she was misdiagnosed 20 years ago. You should have picked it up then. They didn't. So she could have been taking, well, of course, there isn't a cure for Parkinson's, but at least she could have been treated for it way, way back then instead of now being a delayed treatment. Um, and you know what? He says, I'm going up to Portpatrick now. I'm going to be away now. And you would have thought, after knowing that we'd just come from his father-in-law's house, spoken to the father-in-law, to Big Bill, to Ruth, his brother-in-law, and met them, that he might have said, oh, by the way, I told him we're going to Kirkcudbright Stones. I'm not saying, I tell you what, why don't you go and visit the wife? She'd really love to see you. It's been years since you'd cheer her up. She's in there at the home. Because I think he was just going off on his own, and he never did. And because of what happened last time, I never said, is there any chance we could go and visit, your wife? Because he never offered. And of course, then I ended up in a downer because then we drove away and we worked at Kirkcudbright and actually then shows the wife Gordon's little cottage with all his stuff outside of it. Says, that's his. And we had something to eat in a place called Sandhead. And then I was on the downer again. Because if I hadn't seen him, I would have been a bit more buoyant. But after seeing him, I don't know. I do get it, but I don't get it. At the end of the day is, we were, friends. We have a lot in common, and we were going out of our way, out of pure interest in the families, how the family were, and we just trying to talk about positive things, and that's all we would have gone if we'd gone to see Scott's wife. And so to finish off, we came home, and Ruth sent a message to the wife. She says, "Oh, here's a nice message from Ruth." Because you swapped telephone numbers because Ruth was wanting to send the selfie picture, but I still haven't seen it. I've had to look fat, bald, and beady on it. So next thing is, she goes, "Lovely to see you, but the only thing that gives us comfort now is that paradise hope." And then I thought about it, and I just thought, wow, any other religion apart from Jehovah's Witnesses could still have their heavenly hope to see, like all my dad's wife's family side all believe, they're all Catholics but not practicing, but they all still believe if they're not a total twat, they'll go upstairs and they'll have a pint with me dad, apart from me, of everybody who was there that day, apart from me, because I don't believe in the afterlife. But it gives them comfort, and I absolutely get it. But the Jehovah's Witness belief is conditional to the fact of surviving Armageddon. Do you see what I mean? So in other words, Ruth and Gordon's out at the moment, but Ruth and her husband and Scott and Miriam, if they want to see Liz again, because Liz proved her worth till eventually she lost it and died, she'll come back in this resurrection's paradise. But now they've got to make sure for them to see Liz again, and probably Bill, because he looked in such a bad state, that they've got to still continue being a faithful Jehovah's Witness. It's conditional on that. And as they all know, they're all quite scared about, despite going to the meetings, that they still will not be judged as worthy of surviving Armageddon. They don't get that resurrection. In other words, as we know, in the resurrection of the righteous and unrighteous, you can be a right bad lad and come back and get a chance. But if you're a Jehovah's Witness who's lapsed a wee bit, you're going down. And you don't get to see Liz and Bill in the paradise. And Liz and Bill, if once Bill goes, that if they believe that, they'll be resurrected and they'll say, where's Miriam and Ruth? Oh, I'm really sorry, but Tony Morris, the third person, executed them because they both, stopped going. I take it Gordon's not here. Oh no, I didn't think Gordon was going to make it. I'm afraid, So none of my family have made it now. And that's what it is, and she only made it by rights that if you die, it sort of secures your place. If you've then got to keep on living, it's conditional.
You're better. they take the view you're better to die now because you're
Yes,
guaranteed coming back in the resurrection. So if they're
yeah,
alive, if they're living, they've got to make sure that they stay faithful. So it's always about just being in the congregation. The witnesses could teach any old rubbish, but they'll go along with it.
yes,
Because if they didn't go along with it and they're out of the congregation, then
yes.
they could die at Armageddon and maybe not
Yeah,
get a resurrection.
that's right.
So you're right. It's all about self-preservation.
It
So
is.
you don't want to think about all the awkward doctrines and beliefs and the doubts. You put it. So this is where I think the PMOs come in. They know that there's problems with the doctrine and the ideas, but
Yeah.
they want to survive Armageddon. It's a bit like
Again, yeah.
Armageddon replaces hellfire for the
Yes, it is.
witnesses.
Is it?
Yeah,
So the thing about it is, she says all the promises Jehovah. But let's just think. The paradise was should have come in 1995 because the generation that saw 1914, they kept on chopping and changing how old it have to be. But it was done and
yeah,
dusted to say if they're about 14, that then they're old enough to understand the events in the world. So that put their birth at 1900. By 1995, that generation are past. The paradise should have come. So huddle up to the 7 billion who got killed by Tony Morrison chums, but for the rest of our witnesses, if that's happened, because we were still believers in 1995, how different would our lives would have been? Kathy would still be alive. My stepfather would still be alive. My wife's mother would still be alive. All those people your dad wouldn't be in a nursing home. Miriam wouldn't have Parkinson's. Bill wouldn't have Parkinson's. Liz would still be alive. All these people who believed, as we've discussed before, thought that I will not see old age. I will not see Parkinson's.
yeah,
I will not
yeah,
see death because that paradise is coming 1995. And lo and behold, 1995 is when that watchtower came out and just blew it all apart. That's when that
yeah,
came out. And since that time, since those of us with the common sense to go, do you know what? This is complete bullshit. I'm not going to be held to ransom by saying, oh, well, I've got to survive Armageddon because I definitely want to get in that paradise to see my loved ones back. They're held to ransom by a lot of bollocks. And so I was so angry when she said that to me, said that to my wife last night, because I just thought I felt all of a sudden my pity, that the pity they feel for us got transposed to them and thinking, I'm so sorry. I don't know if they've been to all the places that I've been this year. I've managed to go to Australia and Venice and Austria and done some great things. And are they still, carting around and doing things? Maybe they're happy with their life, but it's all, as you said, trying to secure survival through Armageddon.
yeah. And what you're saying there about Ronnie and Margaret Downey, I mean, obviously they were a wee bit older than us,
Yeah.
but they would never have thought back then that they would get this old and have all these health problems. My dad, the same. I mean, my
Yeah.
dad came in thinking that he was going to live through, it was well before he got to the age he is now. He's
Yeah.
91. You know,
Yeah.
we didn't think that we would get to this sort of age.
Yeah. To look like this.
So but I mean, you talk about the 1914 generation passing away. It's all the later generations that are passing
Yeah.
away, you
Yeah.
know. Now
Exactly.
that
It's
not
it's it's
that
not just
they've
it's
gone.
yeah, they've gone. It's not that. It's them, and we're the next one, and we've already lost people that we love from our generation. It's utter
Yeah,
bollocks. And
yeah,
I felt sorry for them. And they still high and mighty. We've got it. You haven't got it. I'm thinking, no, you're only in it because you're trying to survive Armageddon because you want to be reunited with the ones you've lost. And unfortunately, you've spent so many years discounting a potential heavenly hope, despite the paradise being briefly
yeah,
mentioned in the whole of the Bible, but lots about going to heaven. You and
yeah,
as you've discredited that as option B, there's only option A, and you've got to make sure you're in the paradise by surviving Armageddon. So you'll still keep on going to the meetings, playing the safe
yeah.
card, even though in your heart of hearts you're thinking, you know what, this is probably a lot of bollocks.
Yeah. And here's the point. When we spoke to Mags in Glasgow, and she says this, why are you approaching us? You don't get something better to do with your lives.
That's right. Yeah.
The point you're making is that, we're trying to show these ones, convince them that it is a nonsense what they're
Yeah.
clutching onto,
Yeah.
whereas they could be using these years of their life to
Yes.
enjoy their life rather than spending their afternoons and their weekends standing against a brick
Mm.
wall, speaking to no one, achieving nothing, instead
Yeah.
of getting on with their lives where
On with it. Like, that's it.
they've got a healthy life.
That-
So that's what we're
yeah.
trying to do. We're trying to say
Yeah.
to them, forget this nonsense,
Yeah.
have a life,
Yeah. Have a
enjoy a
life.
life,
Yeah. Because you
once,
don't know, because it's the most precious thing we have, and you don't know when that's going to be taken away from you. You don't know whether all of a sudden, like the McCubbins, all of a sudden you've got Parkinson's and all the things that you think you're going to do, you're not going to do. Or, all this, or you start to get dementia and you're incapable. Physically you can, but mentally you can't. It literally, I came away and I just thought, oh, I've got to rethink. I've got to rethink what am I going to what we're all going to do. Will I get the opportunity? So, which is why I've been trying to cram so much in to do now, because I'm thinking you never know. You never know when your next day is going to be here. Anyway, I thought I'd get that off my back.
yeah, no, it's good.
But there you go.
It's amazing the coincidences you just meet all those people all in the one go there like that.
Just unbelievable.
After all these years. But
It's unbelievable.
yeah,
But anyway, I to be honest with you, I'd rather be them than us. And the one thing I just want to end on about if Paradise had come in 1995 when it should have come, and all the people that we've lost and loved and will probably never see them again, is that another um, another thing that's happened because of that going on is that we've had to suffer 2 terms of Donald J. Trump. So there you go.
yeah.
Oh dear.
So yeah, so that we looked at a few videos back about the phrase about Jehovah, his patience. It hasn't come because he's patient with us, and we should view that as being patient God. But as you say, the delay has allowed all the suffering and all
Yes.
our loved ones
Yes.
to suffer and maybe die.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not a benefit.
No. Right, Dino, thanks for the chat. And that is I thought we wouldn't fit in your bit and my bit. So that's
No.
why I thought my bit might be a bit longer because I had to do the backstory for the end story to make any sense at all. Right. Anyway, literally, we've just got a minute to go. So, for everybody who's listening, if you're still here at the end, well done you. But hopefully that's you can understand where we come from. And if you're the Glasgow Jehovah's Witnesses, I think Dino summed it up at the exactly what we do. Anyway, I'm going to say goodbye. See you later.
See you later. Bye now.
Bye bye.